October 15, 1935. Cotton Club, 11:47 p.m. The velvet rope drops like a guillotine blade, and Thomas Murphy, the doorman who 3 weeks ago spit those words at Harlem's most dangerous man, feels his throat close up as Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walks through the front entrance of the Cotton Club for the first time as a paying customer. Not with fists, not with a blade, not with the violence every white patron inside that club was whispering about for 26 days straight. Bumpy walks, in wearing the same navy suit Murphy mocked, the same French cuff shirt, the same mirror-shine Oxfords, but this time, nobody's laughing. The doorman's hands are shaking. The coat-check girl stops mid-breath. Duke Ellington's trumpet goes silent for exactly 4 seconds as Bumpy crosses the threshold into a room that, 3 weeks prior, told him his money, his suit, his dignity weren't good enough because of the color of his skin. Behind him, 12 black professionals, lawyers, doctors, businessmen, file in like soldiers taking occupied territory. They don't rush. They don't shout. They move with the deliberate weight of men who know they've already won a war nobody saw them fighting. Murphy, the same man who called Bumpy a slur loud enough for the whole block to hear, now stands frozen, his lips moving but no sound coming out, because somewhere in the past 3 weeks, something happened that didn't make the papers, something that made Oni Madden, the Irish mobster who owned this palace of segregation, issue a statement that the Cotton Club would now serve patrons of all races. How does a single humiliation on a Thursday night in September become the death rattle of Jim Crow in New York's most famous nightclub? How does one man barred from a doorway bring an empire to its knees without firing a single shot? This isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about surgical precision, about using the enemy's greed as a noose, about understanding that sometimes the most brutal violence is economic suffocation, and Bumpy Johnson was about to teach white New York a lesson it would never forget. But before I show you the move that changed Harlem forever, let me ask you this. If someone publicly humiliated you, stripped you of your dignity in front of your own community, would you have the patience to destroy them slowly? Or would you have swung first and asked questions later? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to see how one man weaponized an entire neighborhood against institutional racism, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Bumpy did in those 3 weeks rewrote the rules of power in America, and most people still don't know it happened. 3 weeks earlier, September 19th, 1935, 8:15 p.m. Let me paint you the Harlem that Bumpy Johnson walked through that Thursday night. This wasn't the Harlem you see in nostalgic documentaries. This was a pressure cooker. The Depression was crushing black families twice as hard as white ones. Unemployment in Harlem was hovering near 50%. Men who'd fought in the Great War came home to breadlines and slums, while downtown Manhattan built skyscrapers and threw champagne parties. And right in the middle of that misery sat the Cotton Club, a monument to hypocrisy so brazen it would have been funny if it wasn't so vicious. Black musicians created the soundtrack of America on that stage. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Ethel Waters. They packed the house 6 nights a week, drawing wealthy white folks uptown to slum it in Harlem, to feel dangerous and cultured at the same time. The club made a fortune off black excellence, but if you were black and tried to walk through those doors as a customer, you weren't good enough. Your money wasn't green enough. Your suit wasn't sharp enough. The policy was simple and brutal. Negroes may perform, but they may not patronize. Bumpy Johnson knew this. Everybody in Harlem knew this. But on September 19th, he had a legitimate reason to test that door. Bumpy wasn't just a gangster, though he ran the numbers racket, the policy game, the betting slips that kept half of Harlem fed. He was also a businessman, a strategist, a man who understood leverage. A Jewish textile merchant named Samuel Weiss had invited him to the Cotton Club for a meeting about a real estate deal, a warehouse on Lenox Avenue that could move garments through Harlem, without Italian mob interference. Weiss was already inside, waiting. Bumpy had an invitation. He had money. He had a reason. He walked up to that velvet rope at 8:17 p.m., and Thomas Murphy, a thick-necked Irish kid from Hell's Kitchen who'd been working the door for 6 months, looked Bumpy up and down like he was day-old trash. "We don't serve your kind here, boy." The word boy hung in the air like gun smoke. People on the street stopped walking, a couple of white patrons behind. Bumpy snickered. They came to Harlem for the music and the thrill of being somewhere exotic, but they sure as hell wanted the black folks to stay in their place. Bumpy didn't move. He just stared at Murphy with those dead, flat eyes that had made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. He could have ended Murphy right there. One call, one gesture, and the doorman would have been floating in the East River by sunrise. But Bumpy didn't move. He didn't speak. He just turned around and walked back into Harlem, his jaw tight, his hands in his pockets, his mind already 3 steps ahead of what everybody expected. Because here's what made Bumpy Johnson different from every other gangster in New York. He understood that real power wasn't about who you could hurt. It was about who you could control. It wasn't about fear. It was about dependency. And the Cotton Club, for all its exclusion, its segregation, its smug white supremacy, was built on a foundation that was 100% black. The musicians were black. The kitchen staff was black. The suppliers came through black neighborhoods. The liquor, during Prohibition and after, moved through black hands. Every dollar Oni Madden made, he made by exploiting black labor and black culture while keeping black people locked outside like dogs. Bumpy saw it all in that walk home, and by the time he reached his apartment on 139th Street, he wasn't angry anymore. He was smiling. So here's my question for you. Do you think money is ever enough to break a 5-year loyalty? Because Bumpy was about to find out who he could trust and who he couldn't. Drop your answer below. September 20th, 1935, 10 a.m. A brownstone on Edgecombe Avenue. Bumpy Johnson doesn't sleep much after humiliation. He sits in the dark smoking cigarettes, turning the problem over in his mind like a Rubik's Cube. By the time the sun comes up, he's already made 4 phone calls. By noon, he's sitting in a room with 5 men who shouldn't be in the same zip code together, let alone the same room. On his left, Theodore Teddy Green, a black lawyer who graduated from Howard University and spent his days filing housing discrimination lawsuits that judges threw out before lunch. Sharp mind, sharper tongue. He hated the Cotton Club on principle, but he was a man of the law. Violence made him nervous. On his right, Adam Clayton Powell Sr., pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, the most powerful black church in New York. A man who preached patience and moral righteousness every Sunday, but who also understood that sometimes righteousness needed a little push. Across from him, Marcus Silky Reeves, a union organizer who'd been trying to get the club's black workers to strike for better wages for 2 years. The waiters, the dishwashers, the kitchen staff, they were scared. They needed jobs. But Silky had been planting seeds, and now those seeds were about to bear fruit. And in the corner, quiet as a ghost, 2 other numbers runners, competitors of Bumpy's, men who controlled different blocks of Harlem's gambling empire. Normally they'd be at each other's throats, but Bumpy had called a truce because what he was about to propose was bigger than turf wars. "We're gonna choke the Cotton Club," Bumpy said. No preamble, no speeches. "We're gonna choke it so slow they won't even realize they're dying until it's too late." Teddy Green leaned forward. "You want to sue them?" "I can." "Draft papers for discrimination." "I don't want to sue them," Bumpy interrupted. "Courts don't care about us. We need to hit them where they care." "The money," Silky said, catching on fast. "The money," Bumpy repeated. "Every dollar Oni Madden makes, he makes off our backs. The musicians, the staff, the suppliers. Every single link in his chain is black. So we start breaking links." Reverend Powell shifted uncomfortably. "Brother Bumpy, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't condone violence." "I'm not asking you to," Bumpy said. "I'm asking you to preach. You've been preaching about dignity, about justice, about how the Cotton Club exploits our community while locking us out. Keep preaching. Louder. Every Sunday. Make it so every black family in Harlem knows that club is a symbol of shame." Powell considered this. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. Bumpy turned to Silky. "Your union boys, they ready to slow down?" "Slow down?" Silky grinned. "Brother, they've been waiting for an excuse. Those waiters move fast because they're scared of getting fired. But if they think they've got protection, if they think the whole community's behind them, they'll drag their feet." Bumpy finished. "Orders take longer. Service gets sloppy. White folks start complaining, and Madden starts bleeding money." One of the numbers runners spoke up. "What about suppliers? The meat, the liquor, the produce? Most of that comes through Harlem vendors." Bumpy lit another cigarette. "We shut them down. Every supplier who sells to the Cotton Club, we make it clear. You're choosing sides. You can sell to them, or you can sell to the rest of Harlem. Not both. Teddy Green shook his head, but he was smiling now. You're gonna strangle them with red tape and bad service. No guns, no headlines, just suffocation. Exactly, Bumpy said. And when they're weak, when they're losing money, when Madden's Italian friends start asking why his cash cow is dying, that's when you come in, Teddy. You offer him a way out. Integrate the club or watch it collapse. The room went quiet. This wasn't a gang war. This wasn't a mob hit. This was something new, something organized, strategic, almost political. Reverend Powell stood up slowly. If we do this, it can't be about revenge. It has to be about justice. If this is just about your pride, Bumpy, I can't be part of it. Bumpy met his eyes. Reverend, every black man in Harlem felt what I felt last night. This isn't about me. This is about showing them we don't need their permission to take what's ours. Powell nodded once. Then I'll preach. And just like that, the coalition was born. A gangster, a preacher, a lawyer, a union man, and 2 rivals, all working toward the same goal. Now, here's what I want to know from you. Who's the real villain in this story? Is it Oni Madden, the mobster who built an empire on segregation? Is it Thomas Murphy, the doorman who enforced it? Or is it the system that made all of it legal? Drop your answer below. And if you're hooked, make sure you're subscribed, because this story gets darker before it gets better. September 21st, October 10th, 1935. The war nobody saw. Let me show you how you dismantle an empire without throwing a single punch. Phase 1 started that Sunday, September 22nd, at Abyssinian Baptist Church. Reverend Powell stood in front of 2,500 parishioners and delivered a sermon, titled The Pharaohs of Harlem. He didn't name the Cotton Club directly. He was too smart for that. But he talked about establishments that grew rich off black genius while treating black people like servants. He talked about dignity. He talked about economic power. And at the end of the service, he said something that rippled through Harlem like electricity. If a business doesn't respect us as customers, maybe we shouldn't respect them as partners. By Monday morning, 3 produce suppliers who'd been selling vegetables to the Cotton Club for years got visits from community leaders. The message was polite but clear. We notice you're doing business with folks who don't want our business. That's your choice. But you should know, we have other vendors who'd appreciate our loyalty. 2 of the suppliers caved immediately. The 3rd held out for 4 days, until he realized he was losing contracts with every restaurant, boarding house, and grocery store in Harlem. The Cotton Club's food costs jumped 40% overnight, because they had to bring in white suppliers from downtown, who charged premium prices for the inconvenience. Phase 2 was even more elegant. Marcus "Silky" Reeves met with the Cotton Club's waitstaff in a basement on Lenox Avenue. 15 black men, all scared of losing their jobs, all exhausted from working double shifts for half wages. Silky didn't ask them to strike. He didn't ask them to quit. He just asked them to follow the rules. Every health code regulation, Silky said, grinning. Every safety procedure. Every break you're entitled to by law. Do your job perfectly. Just do it slow. And they did. Orders that used to take 3 minutes now took 7. Tables didn't get cleared as fast. The kitchen started running out of popular dishes because communication between the floor and the back of house got mysteriously sluggish. Nothing you could fire someone for. Nothing that violated their contracts. Just inefficiency. By the end of the first week, complaints were piling up. White patrons, used to being treated like royalty, were furious. They didn't blame the staff. They blamed management. Phase 3 was where Teddy Green earned his fee. He started filing complaints with the New York City Health Department. Not fake ones, real ones. Turns out, when you actually inspect a nightclub built in 1923, you find code violations everywhere. Improper ventilation in the kitchen, fire exits that didn't meet updated regulations, rat droppings in the storage room. Inspectors started showing up twice a week. Each violation came with a fine. Each fine came with a deadline to fix the problem. And fixing problems cost money. Money the Cotton Club was already losing due to bad service and expensive suppliers. But the real genius? Bumpy made sure Oni Madden's mob connections couldn't help him. See, the Italian mob, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, they ran most of New York's rackets. But they were smart enough to know that a race war in Harlem was bad for business. Bumpy reached out through back channels, made it clear. This is between me and Madden. This isn't about territory. This isn't about the rackets. This is about respect. Stay out of it and we all keep making money. Luciano, who'd done business with Bumpy for years, saw the writing on the wall. He told Madden, "Handle your own mess. I'm not burning bridges in Harlem over a doorman's big mouth." Madden was alone. By October 5th, the Cotton Club was hemorrhaging cash. Revenues were down 35%. Operating costs were up 50%. The biggest acts were still performing, but whispers were spreading. Musicians were hearing about the boycott, about the mobilization, about the fact that Harlem's most powerful man had been humiliated at the door. Some of them were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about their own complicity. And then, on October 10th, Teddy Green walked into Madden's office at the Harding Hotel with a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a threat. It was a business proposal. "Mr. Madden," Teddy said, sitting down without being invited, "I represent a coalition of Harlem business and community leaders. We've noticed your establishment is experiencing some operational difficulties. We'd like to help you resolve them." Madden stared at him. "Get out." "In exchange for one small policy change," Teddy continued, ignoring him, "you open your doors to black patrons, not just performers, paying customers. And all your current problems, the suppliers, the inspections, the labor issues, they disappear overnight. You're trying to blackmail me?" Teddy smiled. "Mr. Madden, I'm trying to save your business. Because if things continue the way they're going, you won't have a business to run by Christmas. And we both know your friends aren't coming to help you." Madden's jaw tightened. He was a mobster, a killer, a man who'd built his empire on violence and intimidation. But he was also a businessman, and Teddy Green had just shown him the math. "Here's my question for you. Is Bumpy Johnson a hero for protecting his community's dignity, or is he just a smarter criminal using the system to his advantage? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to see how this ends, hit subscribe, because the climax is coming, and it's ice cold." October 15th, 1935, 6:47 p.m. Oni Madden sits in his office at the Harding Hotel, smoking a cigar that tastes like ash and defeat. The numbers are in front of him. 3 weeks of losses, mounting fines, suppliers demanding cash up front, musicians starting to grumble. His Italian partners have made it clear they're not going to war over this. His Irish crew is too small to fight a neighborhood. He's boxed in. At 7:15 p.m., he picks up the phone and calls his lawyer. At 7:43 p.m., the lawyer calls Teddy Green. At 8:20 p.m., a statement is drafted on Cotton Club letterhead. It reads, "Effective immediately, the Cotton Club welcomes patrons of all races. No apology. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a cold, corporate surrender dressed up as progressive policy." The statement hits the wire services by 9 p.m. By 9:30, every barbershop, beauty salon, and street corner in Harlem is buzzing. By 10 a crowd is gathering outside the club, not to protest, to watch, because Bumpy Johnson had promised 12 men that if Madden caved, they'd be the first through that door. Lawyers, doctors, a postal worker, a school teacher, a tailor, a shop owner, respectable professional black men who'd been shut out of that room their entire lives. And at 11:47 p.m., Bumpy Johnson walks up to the Cotton Club's entrance for the second time in 3 weeks. Thomas Murphy is still working the door, and you can see it in his eyes. The panic, the humiliation, the understanding that everything has changed, and he's on the wrong side of history. Bumpy stops in front of him. The same spot where Murphy called him boy. The same velvet rope. The same doorway. Murphy's hand trembles as he reaches for the rope. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't apologize. He just unhooks the rope and steps aside. Bumpy doesn't gloat. He doesn't smile. He just walks in, and 11 men follow him like a procession, like pallbearers at a funeral for Jim Crow. Inside, the club goes quiet. Duke Ellington's orchestra is mid-song, but the trumpeter misses a note. The white patrons, dressed in their finest, sipping their imported champagne, freeze. Some of them stare. Some of them whisper. A few get up and leave immediately, unwilling to share space with black customers. But most of them stay, because the music is still good, the drinks are still cold, and their discomfort for once doesn't matter more than someone else's dignity. Bumpy and his crew take a table near the stage, not in the back, not hidden, front and center. A waiter, one of Silky's guys, walks over, and you can see the pride in his face as he asks, "What can I get you gentlemen tonight?" Bumpy orders a whiskey. Neat. Top shelf. The waiter grins and walks away, and when he comes back, He sets that drink down like he's serving a king. Duke Ellington from the stage catches Bumpy's eye. He doesn't say anything. He just nods. One musician to one strategist, acknowledging a battle won without a single shot fired. And that's when the weight of it hits the room. This isn't just about one man getting into one club. This is about the fact that an entire system, segregation, exclusion, economic exploitation, just bent because someone figured out how to weaponize dependency. Bumpy didn't beg for a seat at the table. He didn't protest. He didn't appeal to anyone's morality. He just made it more expensive to keep him out than to let him in. Over the next hour, more black patrons arrive. Not a flood, not yet, but a steady trickle. Testing, the new policy, seeing if it's real. And each time someone walks through that door, it's a small earthquake, a crack in a foundation that had seemed unshakable. Thomas Murphy stands at his post, his face pale, his hands shaking. Nobody says anything to him. Nobody has to. He's become irrelevant, a relic of a policy that just died in front of him. By 1 a.m., the Cotton Club looks different. Not fully integrated, not even close, but different enough that you can feel the shift. White patrons and black patrons sitting in the same room, drinking the same liquor, listening to the same music. It's uncomfortable. It's tense. Some people hate it, but it's happening. Bumpy finishes his drink and stands up to leave. The men with him follow. They don't make a scene. They don't celebrate. They just walk out the same way they walked in, with dignity, with purpose, with the knowledge that they just rewrote the rules. Outside, the crowd that's been waiting erupts in quiet. Applause. Not loud, not showy, just enough to acknowledge what just happened. Bumpy lights a cigarette and looks back at the Cotton Club's neon sign, glowing red against the Harlem night. 3 weeks, he says to Teddy Green, who's standing beside him. 3 weeks to break what they said couldn't be broken. Teddy nods. Think it'll stick? Bumpy exhales smoke into the cold October air. It doesn't matter if it sticks. What matters is they know we can do it. They know we've got the power to make them bend. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. And that's the truth of it. The Cotton Club would integrate further over the coming months. Other clubs in Harlem would follow, not out of kindness, but out of fear. Fear that if they didn't, they'd be next. Fear that Bumpy Johnson had just created a blueprint for economic resistance that could be used again and again. This wasn't the civil rights movement. That was still decades away. But this was a prototype, a proof of concept, a demonstration that if you organized, if you strategized, if you understood your enemy's weaknesses, you could force change without waiting for the law or morality to catch up. Bumpy Johnson didn't end segregation that night, but he proved it could be beaten. And 20 years later, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, when Martin Luther King Jr. organized the Montgomery bus boycott, when black communities across the South used economic pressure to demand justice, they were using the same playbook Bumpy wrote in Harlem in 1935. If this story gave you chills, if you understand the power of what just happened, hit that like button right now, because we're about to talk about the lesson and why this moment mattered more than you think. So what's the real lesson here? It's not that violence doesn't work. It's not that morality always wins. It's not even that justice is inevitable. The lesson is this: power respects power. Oni Madden didn't integrate the Cotton Club because Bumpy Johnson appealed to his conscience. He didn't do it because it was the right thing to do. He did it because Bumpy made segregation more expensive than integration. That's the lesson the civil rights movement would learn 20 years later. That's the lesson every marginalized group has had to learn throughout history. You can be right. You can be moral. You can be justified. But if you don't have leverage, none of that matters. Bumpy Johnson understood leverage. He understood that the Cotton Club wasn't powerful because of its name or its reputation. It was powerful because of its cash flow. And cash flow depended on black labor, black culture, and black suppliers. Cut off the supply, and the empire collapses. This is why the Montgomery bus boycott worked. This is why the lunch counter sit-ins worked. This is why economic sanctions work. Because money talks louder than morality, and institutions will bend when their survival is threatened. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Bumpy Johnson didn't do this alone. He needed a coalition, a preacher to mobilize the community, a lawyer to weaponize the legal system, a union organizer to coordinate the workers, other gangsters to control the suppliers. One man with a grudge is just a man with a grudge. But one man with a network, with a strategy, with the ability to unite people who normally compete, that's a movement. And that's what Bumpy built in 3 weeks. Not a gang, not a protest. A coordinated economic siege that forced institutional change. The Cotton Club stayed open until 1940, when it moved downtown and eventually closed for good. By then, Harlem had dozens of integrated clubs and venues. The wall had been breached and it never fully went back up. Thomas Murphy, the doorman, history forgot him. He's a footnote in a story that was never really about him. But Bumpy Johnson, he became a legend. Not just for his criminal empire, but for the night he walked through a door that had been closed to him and changed the rules of power in New York. Now here's the question I want you to think about. What door are you standing in front of right now? What system told you that you don't belong? And what would it take? Not to beg for entry, but to make them open it. Drop your answer below. And if you want to hear the story of how Bumpy Johnson later went to war with the Italian mob and lived to tell the tale, make sure you're subscribed, because that story is even crazier than this one. I'll see you in the next episode. This is history they don't teach you, but it's history you need to know.